Hello, my name's Dal, and I'm the head of programmatic at Seedtag. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the impact of the death of the cookie, and more specifically from a publisher's perspective. I'm delighted to be joined by Pete Beeney. Pete currently leads global agency partnerships at the Washington Post. He joined the Post in 2020 with over 20 years' experience in media and advertising, having previously led Spotify's global partnership with WPP. Pete wears a number of hats at the Post. While his core responsibility is building out their agency partnership practice, he's also leading their programmatic sales efforts, as well as working to keep its traditional print products audience top of mind of agencies. Hi, Pete. How's it going?
Good, Dal. Good to hear your dulcet tones. It's been a long time.
I know it's been a while now. So 3.5, 4 years, I think, since we both worked at Spotify.
Yeah. Although it feels like yesterday, strangely.
I know. We I think sat, even though we were in different teams, we sat really close together. I think, and I do miss the endless thrashing of table tennis that I that I did get from you. I think that the whole culture of table tennis at Spotify, I do miss that. And obviously now, since COVID and working from home, that's a big element of working together as a team that you would miss out on.
Yes, I'm concerned that my skills will have become considerably rusty since COVID began. I think we'd probably be a better match now, Dal, than we were.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I'll take you up on that if I ever do get to travel in the next 10 years. I'll hit you up on that. But yeah, how's it been at the Washington Post? A couple of years now, just under?
Yeah, so I've been at the Washington Post since March 2020. So I really picked my moment to join and to move my family over from London to New York. Obviously, none of us had any clue what was about to unfold in front of us. But that being said, it's been a wonderful place to work. The Washington Post obviously has a huge heritage, and obviously with so much going on in the news cycle at the time that I joined, it felt like I was really, being integrated into a publication of historical significance during a time of historical significance. So that, I'm entirely grateful to Joy Robbins at the Post for bringing me on, because, I just feel like I'm really blessed to have joined this institution at the time that I did, despite obviously the challenges of, the day-to-day challenges of facing the pandemic. But, to be honest, I would have faced those anywhere that I would have gone. No one has been immune from the, overreaching effects of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Everyone's in some shape or form around the world, any industry that you might work in, and any friends and family that you talk to, the word COVID and the two words coronavirus, I think everyone can relate to it and have their own story. And you could probably do an hour podcast, 2-hour podcast just talking about everyone's experiences away from work, I think. But how has that shift been from working over at Spotify, such a, I suppose, dynamic audio company, and moving into a more traditional media, print paper, and as well as, kind of that audience? Did you see that shift, and how was it quite difficult, or was it kind of more similar than you thought it would be?
I didn't really come into it with any preconceived notions. I mean, I think what attracted me to the Post was actually the marriage between, all of the investments that have been made on the engineering and tech side here, and obviously the traditional role that the Washington Post has played as a harbor of consequential journalism, that holds power to account and shines light in dark corners. That aspect of, and it's such a significant, the role that storytelling and journalism from the Post has played in the American democracy over the last 100 years plus, is an enormous thing to be part of. But I think that that's now married to a very forward thinking, very engineering led organization, that gets missed a lot. Right. So it actually didn't feel that different, to get back to the original question, because there is as much emphasis here on technology and engineering as there was at Spotify. It's just that because the Washington Post has this heritage, it leads people to wrongfully, I think, assume that it is a business that's completely rooted in the past, which it isn't. I mean, obviously, it has a wonderful heritage from which to work, and we attract the world's best journalists. But it is very much a tech forward business.
Would you say that's part of your role then, or when you came in, it was a lot with you were talking about the tech side, the back end, the technology that's powering everything that the Washington Post does, because like you said, people or agencies, brands might not have known the capabilities in the past. Would you say that you have been focusing on that and pushing that, the technology side?
Yeah, I have been, but also the applicability of the technology that we have. I think, since the Post was bought by Jeff Bezos, I think a lot has been written about those investments that have been made. But I think it hasn't necessarily translated, because that's a reasonably recent acquisition. If you think about it in the timeline of the actual history of the Post, it takes time to really establish what the modern Post is as compared to what the Post used to be. And yeah, we are still trying to bring that message to the marketplace and bring that message to agencies and bring that message to senior clients. But it also, now is a lot about what can we be doing that shows that we are a tech forward business rather than telling people that we're a tech forward business. So that's been a lot of the focus of my team, has been just really establishing our credentials amongst those senior leaders within agencies, but then starting to show them what we mean by being a technology forward publisher, in the form of alphas and beta tests and getting them a look under the hood of some of the work that we do here on the engineering side.
And does programmatic sit at the heart of that? Your role includes the development of programmatic sales within the company. How has that shift been towards programmatic channels?
Yeah, when I joined the Post, programmatic has been a boon to the Post from a financial standpoint, but very much from that kind of yield standpoint. Like, the open obviously brings a lot of revenue to the Post. It does to many major publishers that have significant reach like we do, but where we've really started to pivot has been more looking at programmatic through the lens of being somewhat a replacement for some types of direct buying, and to some extent to shore up the decline of the print products, right? Because if you think about it, we have been incredibly successful at running, in our digital O&O side of our business, we've been very, very successful at driving large branded content programs, multi-million-dollar programs for a number of major blue chip clients. But those are big, heavy lifts, both often for the client as well as for ourselves. And they require a great deal of commitment. These are multi-year operations in most cases. But as print declines, and print has been very much a traditional media purchase. You know what you're buying. You're buying a space in the paper. It has a certain cost to it. And it has a lot less transactional friction. In a traditional print buy, somebody knows what they're buying. They buy the space, you negotiate on price, you sell that space, and it's done, right? And that actually is a lot more akin to programmatic sales, obviously, but with programmatic sales, it's a lot more automated. So we're starting to look a lot more at how can we increase the amount of programmatic direct work that we do, because we understand that both agencies and clients are looking to gain as much efficiency as they can. Automating a number of their straight media purchase processes, is beneficial to them. And we need to be able to have enough bodies in the market to be able to access that demand in a way which isn't completely automated like the open is. And because we feel that as time goes on, yes, obviously everybody has been given a bit of a stay of execution as far as the death of the cookie is concerned. Yeah. But it is also something that we have to think about, which is how do we build a greater level of direct person-to-person relationships, even in the programmatic space. And that requires butts on seats. There needs to be human beings as part of those transactions. They aren't fully automated. So that's where a lot of our investment from my team has been, is trying to get the right people on board within the Post so that we can be having those human to human relationships that are still required to make programmatic work.
Yeah, and you would have probably remembered from our Spotify days the company-wide rollout of the trade desk training, and I think it was about 10 hours of training. So there's obviously different ways to, like you said, put bums on seats and getting more people out there in the market to talk about a programmatic offering. One way is training, like I said, what Spotify did, but obviously going in market and hiring aggressively as well. How do you find that sweet spot, and what have you guys been doing? Is it a mix of both, or are you kind of going towards one way or another?
It has been a mix of both. I think we've, like a lot of businesses, including Spotify, have come to the conclusion that at the end of the day, the ability to understand the programmatic marketplace is a necessity of any salesperson now. In digital, there's no optionality to it. Really, I think for anyone that wants to be successful in their career going forward, because ultimately clients have their own strategies as to how they want to spend money with any publisher or with any platform. And there's a responsibility on the shoulders of that publisher or platform to meet the client where they want to be. Right. And when I say client, I mean that can be a marketer as much as it can be an agency. But so in order to meet those clients where they are, there has to be a certain degree of programmatic competency across the entire organization. So we have embarked on the trade desk training here at the Post as well, and have an evergreen process of training which goes on to our entire sales staff to ensure that they are as up to speed as they can be on how programmatic is evolving, because it is always evolving. I mean, that is the nature of the business. But so that really the aim that we have is very customer focused, and that is that there is no friction being placed on the client by us that is driving in one direction or the other. We want to fit in with their investment strategy. And if that's programmatic, we need to be able to service that. And if it's direct O&O and a major, brand integration, we have to be able to also as effectively be able to service that kind of revenue. So we see it as not really a choice. Everyone has to be good at programmatic within the Post.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. Throughout my career, it's always been joining publishers at an early stage where we've gone through those stages of upskilling, ensuring the materials and the collateral and the tools 100%. That's, for the salespeople to be confident to go out and market and talk about programmatic freely and be more consultative. I think it is important for salespeople to obviously have that training, but also you would sometimes need those leads to come in that have already have that experience talking to the right people, focusing on the trading desk, focusing on the DSPs, the SSPs, all the acronyms that are out there. I think that is an important thing. So how hard has it been to find these people in the market for the Washington Post, or are they readily available? Do you have these programmatic leads that are jumping at the chance to join the Post?
Well, I was lucky in that I inherited a partial team when I got here who were very capable. So it was really just about adding to that. And it was also about how do we organizationally structure programmatic so that it doesn't seem different to the rest of the way that we sell within the Post. Because I think that is where a lot of businesses struggle, is they do, to your earlier point about all the acronyms that float around, there is a lot of, I would argue in some cases, needless complexity within the programmatic ecosystem that scares people off and is really intimidating, especially if they're coming into it with little experience. so we needed to look for people that were going to be able to be really highly consultative internally and start to demystify a lot of that for the rest of our staff. But also, we don't want to separate programmatic as to being something completely different. We just want to look at it as a different route for revenue to enter the Washington Post, right? Not as some separate and completely different entity that requires a whole different skill set to selling anything else within the Washington Post, be it Washington Post Live, print, digital O&O. So that meant that we needed to align the processes that we currently had in the rest of our business. So, post-sale support being a really good example of that. We've structured it now so that, we have a frontline programmatic sales force who are there really to be the face of the Washington Post within agencies, within agencies' programmatic departments and programmatic trading desks, and to give support and confidence to the rest of the sales team when it comes to selling programmatic. But that when it starts to get down to the nuts and bolts, which can actually be pretty labor intensive, there is, I think, a fallacy about programmatic that it's kind of, set it and forget it, that you switch on a PMP and you walk away and the money comes flowing in, which it doesn't. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of upkeep. There's a lot of troubleshooting that goes on. And if you think about it from a digital direct sales organizations usually have CSM teams which service that. So we've gone and we've aligned all of our programmatic processes to our digital O&O processes, so they operate exactly the same, so that you don't have a situation where a client partner in our company, when they sell a digital O&O campaign, there's a whole team that supports the delivery of that campaign after they've sold it. The same was not true of programmatic. So we needed to make that true of programmatic so that our teams felt like there was not a huge degree of disparity between what it felt like to sell digital O&O and what it feels like to sell programmatic.
Yeah, I think that service element is vital. I think too many people within the industry or don't know much about the programmatic side of things always think, you set up a programmatic campaign on the supply side and you forget about it. And you just leave it up to your clients to run the campaign and optimize. And, there is a bit of hand holding to do. Even on the media owner side, you need to be in constant dialogue after the campaign. But then it's about who is responsible for that. Is it sales or are they just after, new clients, business development? There is that CSM role, client service managers that are that hybrid, I think, between the ops and or that middle person between ops and sales. So I think they're vital in this scenario. But I think more and more media owners, more and more publishers that I've been speaking to anyway, are hiring these kind of hybrid roles really, where they have that technical experience, but then they also have the client facing experience as well.
Yeah, and just to get back to your original point about has it been easy to hire in this atmosphere? I think it has. It's just required, obviously, a little bit more proactivity. One thing that we really do benefit from is the Post means a lot to people, to the right kind of person. When I first joined, the term that was used is, the Post is looking for missionaries, not mercenaries, right? And there are a lot of people who, from a principle standpoint, very much are aligned, in terms of their personal principles with what it is that the Washington Post does. The seeking the truth, holding power to account, telling stories which are consequential to culture. So, those are the kind of people that we're looking for. But when we find them, they are very motivated to work at the Post. So we really benefit from that. That's a real kind of tailwind that we have when it comes to hiring. So I benefit from that as we, look out for talent.
Definitely, the brand must help massively. Going slightly, I suppose, change of topic really, but I wanted to get your stance on obviously the impending death of the cookie. We saw Google's announcement that's delayed it again. But how have you guys at the Washington Post thought about the death of the cookie, and have you changed any technology or any branding or messaging on your side?
No, not really. I think we are fortunate, right? I think what the death of the cookie is going to mean is that, some businesses are going to benefit from it. Some are going to be very hurt by it. Some of the technology investments that have been made here at the Post prior to that announcement even being made will benefit us when that day comes. We are still looking at it from the viewpoint of, okay, it may have been delayed, but it's not going away, right? So, some of the impetus for, the removal of the cookie in the first place, we are moving into a much more privacy focused and privacy conscious world. That's not going to stop, right? So it just means that everyone's got a little bit more time to prepare. But they'd be foolish to think that it's just going to go back into a completely, identity ruled advertising ecosystem forevermore. But we, certainly the investments that were made in the Zeus technology suite, and in particular Zeus Insights, our ability to understand our readers from their browsing and topic history and their the contextual targeting engine that we have and that we built, will suit us well in a post-cookie world. So we didn't really need to shift that much. There wasn't a huge amendment that was required on our part. And I think that's it's just going to be an even more entrenched case of the haves and the have-nots. So businesses like ours that have very, very strong brand equity and a very deep trust-based relationship with its user base will likely benefit. Those without are going to be in trouble.
And going back to the brand of the Washington Post, do you think that will help in a lot of ways for the agencies that are now thinking about the death of the cookie? They want to be across premium content. The conversations that you've had in the market, and I know even in your role at Spotify, you work very closely with the agency groups and C-suite people that work within there. How are they thinking about it, and are they, reducing their potential site list of partners from 100 or 1,000, by 90%? Is that kind of what they're doing as well and thinking about?
Yeah, I think that they are thinking much along the lines of fewer, bigger, better, right? And because we are in the bigger and better category, we'll probably be the ones that fall into the fewer, right? You don't want to be outside of that circle, as that partner selection is being established with the major agency groups. But yeah, in terms of what I hear from senior personnel within agencies, is that there is a real need to now establish stronger relationships with the bigger players in the market who have verifiable audiences and have a deeper relationship with their customers or their readers in our case. And that there's going to be less appetite from clients in their view of, being able to just get super cheap CPMs and extremely large reach, some of which won't even be real, let's be honest. And the idea of being able to reach any individual in the cheapest possible place that they can, and therefore driving efficiencies that way, that world is gone. But that it isn't necessarily a bad thing, because ultimately, where we will benefit is that consumers inherently understand or will make value judgments on brands based on where they see those brands. So I think to some extent, some of what has driven the industry up until this point has been a fallacy. And that is that, that Dow Gill, is if they're an attractive consumer to my brand.
I thought this was going somewhere else there, but yeah,
No.
consumer. Okay.
Yeah, that you as a potential target for a brand will recognize the difference between seeing that brand on on the Washington Post and randomly seeing that brand on a long tail website that does not hold as much value in your mind as a editorial product, and that they shouldn't necessarily see the cheap CPM as the be all and end all, because it isn't necessarily saying about their brand what they might want it to, or establishing the same value in your mind as a consumer as they might do somewhere else, which is slightly more expensive, but where there's a lot of established trust and credibility in the organization and the content around which the brand is being seen.
Back to your point about agencies and brands now only selecting a small amount of potential media owners. Does that then give the power back to the publishers, would you say? In the past, it's always been, especially in the programmatic ecosystem, we've always, as media owners, been setting our prices, and it doesn't happen often, but the agency can turn around and say, well, I can buy your inventory, for a fraction of that in the open market. And due to the death of the cookie, there's less third-party data now that they can overlay. So now they're having to talk direct to, the clients are having to talk direct to publishers like yourselves. Does that then put you guys back in the driving seat in terms of, negotiating, whether it's deals, whether it's rates, or not so much, do you think?
No, I definitely think it puts us in the driving seat. But also, if you look at it through the lens of the Washington Post, what a brand has access to on the open is a fraction of what they have access to in programmatic direct or digital O&O with us in terms of sophisticated contextual targeting capabilities. All of that is not really available to them on the open. So the full suite of our technology can only really be leveraged with a relationship with the Washington Post, rather than trying to do that over the open. So I think we were already kind of going in that direction anyway.
Okay.
And there's a lot that we can do matching advertiser first-party data to, our contextual understanding and being able to find those so it's in the best interest, or at least in our circumstance, there is so much more that a brand or an agency can do with the Washington Post if they have a relationship with the Washington Post that they can achieve than they can if they're, attempting to look at it only through the lens of price and essentially keeping an arm's length from the Post. And when I say that, I mean, looking at our inventory through the open rather than through direct or through programmatic direct.
Is it safe to say then the programmatic partners that you guys, the Washington Post, have are, in the same sense that you're only working with a few, or are you working with a whole range of different partners, or are you really seeing what kind of value that they bring to you?
We try to be agnostic, right? Ultimately, it goes back to that same sentiment, which I mentioned earlier in this conversation, and that was that we want to be wherever our clients want to be, right? We have to be able to fit to their requirements. And so being, technology or platform agnostic is an important part of that, because we aim to reduce friction wherever we possibly can. So if we are forcing brands to go through particular tech partners in which to access imagery on the Washington Post, that inherently creates friction, and that can, then it becomes, there's an option, whether the client can be bothered to get through some sort of workaround or to find another way onto our platform. And we want to do our best to avoid that wherever we can. So we'll work with as many partners as it takes to make that a reality.
Definitely. And it kind of nicely goes on to my point stroke question, which was around obviously COVID, the pandemic that started, early last year. What we saw at Seedtag, especially, we work with many different publishers. A lot of them are news publishers, and even in the trade press, there was a lot of conversations about big news sites, big news publications lost out on a lot of ad revenue because of just simple block lists and simple terms that were, just taken out. Advertisers would block the term COVID or pandemic, not knowing whether that article could have been actually in a positive way where their brand would have worked really nicely on that page. How did you see that at the Washington Post? Obviously, you did start just then, so you might not have a lot of this information, but how over the last year and a half has that changed, and are advertisers as scared of the word COVID now as they were before? And how has technology helped you to overcome those challenges that I mentioned?
I think everybody struggled from it. I think there was this bizarre dichotomy that most major publishers like ourselves faced at the onset of the COVID crisis, and that was, because we are a trusted news source, when somebody's health is at risk, you become a very, very popular source of information, right? And rightly so, because when you have if you have a fatal pathogen going around the society as a whole, people want to know how to deal with it, and they're going to go to news sources which they trust because information becomes really, really important in that circumstance. And obviously, what that meant was our page reviews, as did many other publishers of our stature, went through the roof. At the very same time, a lot of the blocklisting behaviors that were going on by marketers were moving brand dollars away from our publication, right? Which is infuriating to see at the time, because you're thinking, okay, well, this is going to be very good for us from a financially supporting our journalism at a really important time, but then a lot of this revenue is being steered away. And I think because a lot of it is, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but less sophisticated than it's marketed to be. A really good example of this, and I'm probably going to butcher this because I'm not actually reading it straight from I think it was a LinkedIn post by Adam Foley at The Guardian. And it was very interesting. If memory serves, he was showing how much of The Guardian's digital front page, the masthead, was being blocked because of the use of the term drugs, when the sentiment of the story, I believe, was about the breakthrough of the AstraZeneca vaccine, right, in the UK. So, to all intents and purposes, a hugely positive news story, right? Probably the most positive news story that would have happened since the onset of the pandemic. But because of the term drugs, because the vaccine was a drug, a lot of the technology that was being used to keep brands safe was essentially ensuring that almost nobody was advertising around that content. So
yeah, that's such a good point. I think that's why it's so important for there to be constant dialogue and getting different perspectives from different technologies, and that education, the word again, education. There needs to be that education in market, throughout the market. It's not just publishers talking to agencies or clients. It's tech companies, contextual data companies. Everyone needs to be having a conversation, I think, about this topic, because it's such a shame, isn't it, that there's not just one person losing, and it's not just the consumer losing out, but the publisher will lose out. They'll lose out on revenues. They might have to go through layoffs, etc. Families are affected. So yeah, I think it's such an important topic that needs to be addressed a lot more, I think.
Yeah, and in the case of news organizations, you have to think of where that revenue is going, right? That revenue is being used to pay for in-depth journalism, which is going to help save lives, right? So there's a bit of a moral imperative behind this as well. And I can understand it's a difficult situation that brands find themselves in. I think the popularity of Google and Facebook, obviously, is their levels of reach are unprecedented. But also, as digital publishing has proliferated, it's added a degree of complexity, which poses a huge challenge to a number of advertisers. And they're always looking for businesses that can come in and simplify, right? And I think that is where some of the brand safety verification businesses really benefit, because it does look like a panacea to advertisers. They go, okay, great. Here we are in a situation where somebody's going to make all this complexity of keeping my brand safe across all these thousands or tens of thousands of sites where my advertising is being seen. They're going to handle that for me. But it can also be a blunt instrument. And I think that Facebook and Google too also benefit from that, because it allows advertisers to, get their reach target. They're able to achieve their reach targets with a single entity, right? You could choose one or the other or both, and really not have to deal with any other media organization within the digital ecosystem, right? You're going to get
that'd be a boring world, wouldn't it?
Yeah, an incredibly boring world. But you can understand, if we put this back to Spotify is a really good example here of what an enormous driver ease and convenience is to humans in general, right? Because if you think about what Spotify was, when Spotify came along, the biggest distribution source for music was piracy, right? And piracy has an amazing price point. It's free. And I feel like Spotify's big value add to the music consumer and to the rights holders, the music ecosystem, was essentially proving that ease and convenience is such a great driver, right? Because piracy was a pain in the ass. Let's be honest. You might be pulling down a song that was put up there intentionally by a label, and it's a bunch of white noise, or, you can't find that one track from an album and you have to wait for everything to download. And, using file sharing services, was an inconvenient process. And Spotify proved that the consumer was willing to pay if you make that a streamlined and convenient process. And I think, a marketer is still a consumer. They're a consumer of media channels in which to place their brand. And what Facebook and Google do a good job of is being a very, very convenient and easy place for them to place the majority of their budget, right? In a way that was never possible really before the rise of digital platforms, right? If you think back to press days, part of the skill set of an agency buyer and agency planners was to understand enough of the titles and the readerships of those titles to be able to identify contextually and audience-wise what was the right mix to be most effective for the KPIs your client had. But obviously the top of that is going to be, can you get the reach that they're after, right? And there was no choice to do that in one place. You had to mix and match. You had to be a multimedia planner. Nowadays, you don't necessarily have to be so much of one of those in order to attain the reach. But I would also argue that going back to the days of having relationships with more of the large publishers means that brands can be effective in a different way. Yes, it's not as easy and it's not as convenient as having one or two partners, but the results will be more effective.
Definitely. I've got one last question for you, Pete. What is the future? What do you think is the future for publishers after the death of the cookie?
The future for publishers, I think, is pretty rosy depending on which publisher you are. We're trying to support through the Zeus technology platform. We provide we license our technology to over 150 publishers across the U.S. Smaller, publishers that are smaller than our own, or than our own publication, but that are, that don't have the resource to be able to invest in technology in the same way that we are able to, but allow them to be able to leverage in the investments that we've made to the benefit of their own sites, right? And I think for a lot of those publishers, that's going to allow them to focus on what they do best, which is publishing high quality journalism, and especially local journalism. But I think there's a very solid future for those publishers. But I think the world will not look as rosy for some intermediary businesses and some of the very, very small publishers who will have benefited from audience buying models as they currently exist, and when those go away, is going to be a potentially terminal drain on their revenues. So that's how I see it. I think it's just going to be it's going to be beneficial to some businesses, and it's going to be very detrimental to others.
Perfect. Well, okay, I think that's all we've got time today for today's podcast. Thanks, Pete, for your time.
Thanks, Dal. Great to talk to you again.